George Reeves gave the impression that heroes existed when he portrayed Superman on screen. Strong, courageous, and endearing, he could have been the role model for all children. He was more than just an actor to many people. The unfortunate issue is that when he passed away unexpectedly in 1959, his burial wasn't what his admirers had hoped for. There were no individuals there. No cameras were in the area. Hollywood, where he was once a star, was now quiet. Few individuals showed up to bid farewell. It was really quiet for such a famous person. How could the well-adored individual eventually bid farewell to such a quiet audience? It could be the wrong time and place. Or perhaps folks stayed away and didn't arrive for more sinister, obscure reasons. What was the reason of the cape-wearing man? Regardless, why did everyone abandon Superman when he most needed them? All things George Reeves. George Reeves, the original Superman, was born on January 5, 1914, in Woolstock, Iowa. They gave him the name George Kefir Brewer at birth. It was unfortunate that George's parents divorced shortly after his birth. He and his mother moved around a lot throughout his early years. They stayed in California after first visiting Kentucky and then Illinois. In California, George's mother Ellen wed a man called Frank Besselo. George became George Besselo after Frank took him in. However, this marriage was short-lived as well. After they split up, Helen informed George that Frank had passed away. Until George grew up and found out that Frank was still alive, that is. For a long period, he struggled greatly with this emotional turmoil. George found satisfaction in the arts despite the ups and downs of his early life. He was talented at acting and singing, and he enjoyed playing at school. He attended Pasadena Junior College and the renowned Pasadena Playhouse to pursue acting after high school. There, he also met Eleanora Needles, whom he married in 1940. They divorced in 1950, 10 years into their marriage. George's major break probably came in 1939 when he played a little part in Gone with the Wind. It was a tiny portion, but it was sufficient to draw attention to him. He then swiftly signed a contract with Warner Brothers, changing his stage name to George Reeves. He continued to be busy over the ensuing years. However, the majority of the films he starred in would have been better as B-movies that aided his career, and very few of them were successful or well-liked. George then signed a contract with 20th Century Fox, but that agreement also didn't last long. However, his life altered in 1942 when he was chosen to perform in the war play So Proudly We Hail. He decided to enlist in the military. He became a U.S. was assigned to the Army Air Forces in early 1943. He created training DVDs for soldiers and starred in the drama Winged Victory, which was also adapted into a movie. After the war, George returned to Hollywood. He didn't get many assignments, though, and the company was constantly evolving. Yes, he accepted whatever work that was offered to him, including little roles in motion pictures. He also used to excavate cesspools to get money. In 1951, George was recruited to play Superman in a brand new television program. He wasn't initially really thrilled about it because TV wasn't as well known as it is now. However, the show was a huge success, and George gained notoriety as a result. However, the victory also had certain drawbacks. As a result, George's role as Superman became so associated that his other parts were forgotten. Plans to return failed since he was unable to work on any other projects due to his deal. George Reeves was having a difficult time in the late 1950s. Superman was adored by the public, but he was unable to abandon the role. No matter how hard he tried, Hollywood refused to give him major acting roles since he was caught in a certain mold, and most casting directors couldn't identify him from any other role outside Man of Steel. In addition, he felt that his pay was inadequate for such a significant and challenging work. To be honest, George wanted to abandon the Superman concept and be free to be more imaginative. He decided to create his own television program. He named the story Port of Entry and wrote it. To give the play a thrilling, international vibe, he intended to film it in a variety of locations, including Hawaii and Mexico. George's version of events was a bold and inspirational proposal. However, no one was ready to provide funding for the proposal, therefore it was merely planned. The Adventures of Superman crew also had a difficult time at the same period. They couldn't find someone to take George's place. They apparently offered him $5,000 a week to return, which was a substantial sum of money at the time, especially considering that they only kept records for a few weeks out of the year. Despite his feelings of guilt, George decided to return because he had no other option and was experiencing financial difficulties. Nearly everything was prepared for the start of the new season in 1959. The players were gathering, the costumes were being changed, and the writers were working on new texts. George was 45 years old and yet unsure of his identity as Superman. He was a little hesitant, but he was due to begin filming soon. But what did occur was unexpected. Before the film could start, George Reeves passed away unexpectedly. Those in the entertainment industry were taken aback by the news. Superman was no longer the cheerful, smiling Superman that millions of people watched on television. And there was the fact that his death was unclear from the beginning. He was the subject of endless stories. There were those who believed he had committed suicide and those who did not. It became a tragedy with no positive outcome. Following what transpired, George Reeves is the name that continues to be discussed. His latter days were filled with sorrow and unfulfilled dreams. He was preparing for one final performance as the Man of Steel when all of this horrible stuff occurred. Money issues, career objectives, and engagement. By 1958, George Reeves' personal life was undergoing significant shift in addition to developments at work. He had recently split from Tony Manx, who is married to Eddie Manx, a senior MGM executive. Then George asked Leonore Lemon, a woman renowned for her flamboyant nature and affluent lifestyle, to marry him. They were rumored to be getting married on June 19, 1959, shortly after their breakup, and then taking a honeymoon trip to Tijuana. George appeared to be prepared to start anew from the outside. Perhaps a new marriage, a new career, or the beginning of a new chapter in your life. However, when they were by themselves, things were very different. We must learn what went on behind the scenes. They were astonished when George revealed his financial difficulties to his mother and best friends. For example, he did not have as much money as people believed he was making. For instance, despite his fame from the Superman TV series, he was only able to work a few weeks a year due to the shooting schedule, and the money was not very excellent by Hollywood standards. But George remained optimistic. The show was still able to produce a fresh season of Adventures of Superman. He persisted because of that tiny glimmer of hope. In addition, he was attempting to transition into directing. George brought this vision to reality with the assistance of Phyllis Coates, who portrayed Lois Lane at the beginning of the series. He believed that this project would be the one to ultimately release him from the Superman persona that had taken on a life of its own. When the funds failed to materialize, his intentions to begin the project were derailed. He obviously had other options, but they were all connected to Superman once more. A Superman stage concert was scheduled for July, and there was discussion about taking the show on tour in Australia. However, these occupations might still cause George to reflect on his inability to leave the Cape. Even though he was 45 and they might have given him financial support, he was in a difficult situation and was neither free nor popular. Although he was adored by many as Superman, he had no intention of playing the role indefinitely. Although George Reeves had many aspirations, his life was actually far more challenging, and it appeared that he was becoming dissatisfied. The cape-wearing individual. Even though George Reeves was sick of being referred to solely as Superman, his admirers were always complimentary of his portrayal of the character. People would frequently comment on how kind, considerate, and grounded he was. He appeared to be one of the few self-centered males in the entertainment industry. Many members of his crew and cast believed he was more than just Superman on television. When he wasn't on TV, he was a really kind guy. The words, "Honest George, the people's friend," were displayed on the door of George's dressing room. That kind of moniker was perfect for him. Everyone at the studio, including the managers and employees, found him to be friendly. He was happy to assist and was usually smiling. He was so popular with children that they only wanted to see him in the role of Superman. George took it seriously since he was aware that children viewed him as a hero. Additionally, on a recent tour in the southern United States to promote the show, George received the rank of Colonel of Kentucky as a prize. Even though it was only a joke, it meant a lot to him. When he returned to the studio, the words on his dressing room sign had been altered by the props department. It was new. This little incident demonstrated how much people liked him and how eager he was to be recognized as more than simply a man in a cape. Honest George, also known as Colonel Reeves. That sign was neither a moniker nor a jest. It was discussing the actual individual who created Superman. However, George also wanted his other abilities as a person and as an artist to be known. Even though he experienced issues at work in his later years, it's also crucial to remember that everyone who had the opportunity to work with him would remember his friendliness, modesty, and generally nice nature. For those who knew George Reeves, he was simply Honest George, the amiable man who helped others and an inspiration off-screen, despite the fact that some people believed he played Superman. TV hero George Reeves was more than that. He made an effort to live like one in real life as well. Since so many children admired him, he was aware that being Superman meant assuming numerous responsibilities. He cared about that. To begin with, although George smoked in private, he never did so in front of children or photographers. He was aware that children believed he was Superman. He was still in demand, but serious acting roles were becoming increasingly difficult to come by. He was careful not to lead by example. The fact that teenage fans were so concerned about his appearance contributed to his eventual permanent cessation of smoking. George likewise maintained a very low profile. Children didn't want any scandals or negative press to alter their perception of him. When he was out in public, he was always kind and welcoming, taking the time to meet and greet children who adored him. But he didn't stop there. George had excellent reasons to fight, too. Myasthenia gravis is a deadly muscle illness that he fought to raise awareness of and funds for. He became the Myasthenia Gravis Trust's national chairman in 1955. In that section, it was evident that he wanted to use his popularity for good. George Reeves had a great concern for people, particularly kids. To them, he was more than simply a TV personality. He was a real-life hero who inspired compassion, fortitude, and hope in others. George Reeves's death. The name George Reeves will always be associated with a horrific event that occurred on the evening of June 16, 1959. From 1:30 to 2 o'clock in the morning. The celebrity's body was discovered in the bedroom of his Benedict Canyon, Los Angeles, residence. A bullet had struck his head. He was only 45. As it happened, there were other people in the house at the time besides George. Downstairs were his fiancée, Leonore Lemon, and several friends. According to Leonore, the gun went off when she was in the living room. A very different story was told by George's friend Fred Crane. He claimed that at the time it occurred, someone had informed him that Leonore was considerably closer to the bedroom. The authorities determined that the death was caused by suicide, but many people questioned the veracity of the claim that Leonore hurried downstairs after the shooting and continued shouting, "Tell them I was down here. Tell them I was down here." Despite the fact that several oddities caused others to doubt the decision. It should be noted right away that the gun that was discovered had no fingerprints on it. Other than that, George's hands were free of gunpowder. However, it's possible that the police were not particularly thorough at the time. Stranger still, 2 more bullets were discovered on the floor and the one that killed him was discovered in the ceiling. No one in the house recalled hearing more than one, yet they all came from the rifle at his feet. No indications of a fight or break-in were present. Based on the official findings, the autopsy, and the witness statements, the police concluded that the case was a suicide. However, many admirers and even some friends remained unconvinced. George was very sad, Leonore added after a while. He had no prospect of finding employment, she informed him. He has made multiple unsuccessful attempts to defeat Superman. She reportedly replied, "He's probably going to go shoot himself." When a gunshot was heard, she reportedly said, "See there, I told you so." George Reeves was laid to rest in Altadena, California's Mountain View Cemetery. Even though there were other factors that contributed to his demise, he was nonetheless recognized when he passed away. In 1960, he received a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame for his work on television. He was rightfully recognized by DC Comics in 1985 as one of the 50 individuals who contributed to DC's success. He brought Superman to millions of people. Drama, uncertainty, and a Hollywood secret are all present. Some people were unsure whether George Reeves had committed suicide when his body was discovered. The first person who truly didn't believe this was his mother, Helen Basolo. She was certain that her son would never have done such a thing. She claimed that the police had not given the matter enough consideration to determine whether or not it was suicide. She even engaged renowned attorney Jerry Giesler to investigate the matter further. In his capacity as commander, Giesler ordered George's remains to undergo a second autopsy. Although some new information was discovered, the results were mostly the same as the first one. This time, medical professionals reported that George's head and body were bruised multiple times. Bruising that was poorly described. The mystery was strengthened by that fact. There was still no conclusive evidence of a crime after a month or two of searching, and Giesler gradually ceased to endorse the initial ruling. He left the case because he thought George had discharged the rifle himself. The fake, however, persisted. Nevertheless, the suicide tale didn't completely convince everyone in Hollywood. Many Hollywood personalities, including well-known actors Gig Young and Alan Ladd, didn't accept the official version of events that George had committed himself. Additionally, there was the issue of Eddie Manx, a powerful executive at MGM. For a long time, George had been having an affair with Toni Manx, Eddie's wife. Some believed that a darker aspect of the story might have resulted from this romantic relationship. According to Sam Kastner and Nancy Schoenberger's book Hollywood Kryptonite, there were suspicions that Eddie Manx was making jokes with the mafia, and that they might have had George assassinated in order to conceal the truth or exact revenge on George. When George decided to marry Leonore Lemon and split from Toni Manx, things became even more tricky. People magazine's June 2025 issue speculates that the situation may have exploded due to the abrupt change in conditions. Many people in Hollywood are still frantically attempting to unravel the mystery surrounding George Reeves' death. Others are certain that the most recent stories of celebrity, heartache, and treachery were merely a front for what was actually happening behind closed doors, while others claim that he was in pain on the inside but that no one knew about it. Why did no one attend his funeral? Since George Reeves was their Superman, everyone was anticipating a classic Hollywood funeral when he passed away. However, that did not occur. On July 1, 1959, he had a very intimate farewell ceremony at the Gates Funeral Home's Wayside Chapel in Los Angeles. No major media figures or Hollywood celebrities were present, but there were several close friends like Gig Young, Don Doerr, and Noel Neill. Why was Superman largely ignored by Hollywood? Fear, according to many in the industry, was the reason. Rumors of murder and controversy surrounded Reeves's passing. He was meeting Eddie Manx's wife, Toni Manx, a key MGM messenger who was rumored to have connections to the mafia. Since it became apparent that his death was not a suicide, nobody wanted to offend the powerful people in Hollywood. Friends in the industry claimed that in addition to the low turnout, many were specifically advised not to go. According to certain sources, it was obvious that individuals shouldn't attend. As a result, the ceremony was quiet and unimpressive rather than packed with celebrities. The quiet is deafening when you think about it. In addition to lamenting George Reeves's passing, Hollywood shied away as though it was scared to speak up or be noticed for fear of drawing unwelcome attention to itself. His burial served as a metaphor for the speed at which devotion and celebrity wane when the narrative becomes convoluted. Fear, shame, and erasure were the things that kept people away, not just pain. Hollywood had given up on its own version of Superman. Interest in the George Reeves death mystery was rekindled in 2006 by the release of the film Hollywoodland. George Reeves was portrayed by Ben Affleck. Adrian Brody played a fake private investigator named Louis Simo, while Diane Lane played Toni Manx. Simo was a fictional character, and while he was partially modeled after the actual investigator Milo Spirigio, his demeanor was different. George's mother had employed Milo Spirigio, who had been looking into George's death. In a sense, the movie explored a number of different possibilities of how Reeves could have been killed while also recounting the story with a lot of facts and some fiction. Instead of trying to persuade the audience that one hypothesis was correct, it presented a variety of possibilities. Each one makes a strong argument for being the source of the story's overall confusion and complexity. One theory was that after a drunken dispute, George's fiancée Leonore Lemon had unintentionally shot him. Another theory was that Tony's husband, Eddie Manx, who was the most influential person in the area, may have given the order to assassinate George. Hence, retaliation against Tony, who ended the affair with him. In the third version, Tony was portrayed as the one who broke in through the secret entrance, which she was still familiar with from her background, since she felt unwelcome and envious that no one wanted her. Furthermore, the last theory, which was the most widely accepted of all, was that George, who was extremely miserable and felt like a total failure in both his personal and professional life, chose to take his own life. Suicide is suggested as the most plausible answer in the film, however it is done in a tragic and provocative way. The character played by Adrian Brody, who initially becomes fixated on fame and wealth, is horrified by what he learns. He is forced to reevaluate his life and decide to put his family's needs ahead of making headlines as a result of the case's emotional toll. Years later, a computer-generated image of George Reeves as Superman made a brief appearance on screen in the 2023 DC movie The Flash, bringing his image back. Despite the fact that it was intended to be a tribute, some fans felt that the CGI rendition didn't sit right, especially considering the tragic and nuanced background of the man who created Superman. George Reeves' life was filled with unexpected twists and turns, both exciting and tragic. He had high aspirations when he first started pursuing his dream, and at times it appeared as though he had actually succeeded. He was talented, charming, and attractive. The man with the cape wasn't all that George was. He toured the nation, sang, played guitar, and put a lot of effort into proving that he could play multiple roles. He was generous, polite, and never pretended to be too large for anyone. Nevertheless, he frequently felt imprisoned by a field that adored him for his Superman persona but was unsure of how to handle the man beneath. His life under the shadow of his renown is just as much a part of his biography as his death. There was more to George Reeves' life than that. In addition, he was reserved, complex, and frequently lonely. People still talk about him now because they see a real person in him, not only because of how his life ended. An attempt to make an impression. A man who probably never realized how much he meant to his supporters. The notion that someone who previously felt invisible is now remembered, respected, and important to so many people may be what sticks with us. We appreciate your interest in George Reeves. He experienced both popularity and frustration, as well as highs and lows throughout his life. Decades later, however, his impact as a man and as Superman continues to influence people. If you thought this story was heartbreaking, eye-opening, or fascinating, don't forget to like the movie. Make sure you hit the bell and subscribe to the channel so you never miss an upload if you want to discover more about actual secrets that go on behind the scenes, untold stories, and Hollywood giants. Remember that not all heroes wear capes, and be careful till the next time.